Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 183, recording this on Wednesday, July 15th. Appreciate you guys being here. If you're new watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts, you can rate, review, and we appreciate that good stuff. If you don't know me, I cover the Vikings for The Athletic. I write about the team every single day, and we are about 2 weeks out until go time. I've said it on past podcasts. I said it last week with Judd Zolgad. I am very excited for this thing, to get rolling, and hopefully that came through on Tuesday morning when I filled in as a host for Paul Allen on KFAN. If you tuned in, appreciate you guys for doing so, and if you tuned in, you probably heard, or you may have not heard, a 10-minute quick interview that we did with Arizona Cardinals beat writer Josh Weinfuss of ESPN. So Josh, he's covered the Cardinals for, back to when I was in college. I remember reading some of his stuff going back then. Josh is actually, he went to high school in Hopkins. He lived in Minnetonka for some time. And so it was awesome to be able to have him on the show. And I'm mentioning this and I'm starting here because I asked him really out of the gate, of all the Kyler Murray quarterback narratives that you hear, that are relevant nationally, that, have taken on a life of them own, or lives of them own, which of them to him was the most egregious, the most ridiculous, the one that he thinks is probably the most inaccurate compared to the reality or the truth of Kyler Murray? And his answer was really interesting, and it was on Kyler Murray's work ethic. And, if you guys listen to this and you don't, you haven't read a lot about Kyler, you haven't talked to, like I have, some of the high school coaches he's worked with, some of the Arizona Cardinals front office staff and coaches that I've talked to for stories that I promise will be publishing sooner rather than later at The Athletic. If you haven't done all that, you probably know the Kyler Murray that is kind of the caricature of Kyler Murray when you think, first round picks in football and baseball, when you think, Call of Duty video game, or you think, passer who's moving out of the pocket, scrambling all the time, being real creative, but can't at all play in rhythm. Like, that is the Kyler Murray that I think is the picture in most of you guys' minds. And maybe I'm assuming there, but I, just talking to friends, that's much of what I get as kind of a response when the name Kyler Murray surfaces. And Josh, and when he was asked this question, when I asked him this question, Josh's response was like, Kyler Murray, in the first 3 years of his career, I'd say first 4 years of his career, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, maybe even 23, was running a system, and it was Cliff Kingsbury's system, but it was a system, and you could term it air raid or that's kind of the catch-all term, where it's a space system, it's a shotgun system, but Kyler had run that specific system going back to his time in middle school, really. And so some of the dynamics or the layers of his learning of that system didn't require him to be in the playbook time and time again. I mean, that system, and I've done a lot of work on it, like I said, is interesting in that it was very much a week-to-week system. Very little, I'd say I use the word system, but it like when you talk to people about Cliff Kingsbury's offense, they'll talk about it in many ways like a collection of plays every given week, as opposed to like a foundational, maybe principle organization. And I think you saw that play out a little bit in Washington. And that's not to say that it hasn't worked, because I remember coming on this podcast and previewing that Commanders game last year and saying I was very impressed with what they did. But the reason I bring it up is because if you're running a system or a tangentially related system, going back to 8th grade, 9th grade, you probably don't need to be consuming it the way you would some of these West Coast Vikings offense, Rams offense, some of the way that I think these quarterbacks have to prepare to play in this very rhythm timing based offense. And you cannot overstate the mental aptitude that it takes for these guys to play in this system. Like I was having 2 weeks ago a conversation with a guy who has played in these systems for more than I'd say 6-7 years. And he was just like, Alec, like if only people understood the depths at which you have to go to not only understand the play call, play verbiage, going into the season, but the way, how prepared you have to be throughout a given week to be able to master it on Sunday. And then on Sunday, it is like the ACT times 500. Why? Because you're taking the test and you can get your head knocked off. And so I just think like there is much more of an understanding. And Josh Weinfuss made this pretty clear that when Drew Petzing became the offensive coordinator working with Jonathan Gannon in Arizona, Kyler was committed, very much so, to mastering that offense. And that has been, I'd say, my conversations with people in Arizona have validated that, have verified that, and it guarantees nothing in this specific offense, in this specific situation. But I do find, and I've tweeted this, I put this on social media, I find it so interesting in this era of professional sports and how we consume sports. And I realize, that somebody's going to be making the hairline, the tan here. If you're listening to this and you don't get the live feed on YouTube of how my forehead looks, you are missing out completely. But I just find it so interesting that the narratives of a guy in his career, and it's Kyler Murray, it's Sam Darnold with chasing ghosts or seeing ghosts. Like it happens it's Bryce Young in some ways, where the narrative of who they are is written. And then the only, and I guess it's sensible in some ways, but the only way to overwrite the narrative that has already been written is to have success and win games and take a team to the promised land to then dissuade those narratives from continuing. Like Jalen Hurts had he not won the Super Bowl, had he not competed and performed really, really well at the pinnacle of the sport in Super Bowls, I think, I guess the question I'd ask is like, what would the narrative be of Jalen Hurts' career? And again, like to reiterate, this is not me saying Kyler Murray is going to be this and this offense or going to be that, but I did find it very compelling that Josh Weinfuss did begin the answer on narratives, the work ethic one. He said that after the study clause in his contract surfaced, Kyler essentially called an impromptu press conference. And one of the quotes he made, I've gone back and rewatched this press conference, but one of the quotes Kyler Murray made that day was like, or he was really asking the media a question, like, do you seriously think I can play quarterback in the National Football League with doing no study work? And I'd say this too, like, I think some of the narrative or some of perception is like, and you guys will know this, everyone studies differently. Everyone prepares themselves differently. You guys don't care about this. But like I had college friends who were brilliant, who, didn't really have to study at all. I had college friends who weren't, and they studied their butts off. We're in the library for 9 hours a day. So there's just tendencies, strategies, and people's minds obviously work differently. But I wanted to begin there because, again, the quarterback conversation is going to probably ramp up over the next 2 weeks, and we'll see how long it lasts. And I will be the first one to tell you that when it ends, if it ever ends covering this team and this organization, I will be very happy about it, because while it does make for great podcast fodder, it does not allow someone like me who's so curious and fascinated by all the different subjects to explore them constantly and kind of broadly. And I would say if you didn't hear that interview on KFN, you should be able to find that podcastable with Josh Weinfuss. I didn't want to pipe it directly in this podcast, but we talked a little bit about Kyler's deep ball. That's been another area that I've been really interested in. Frankly, I Um, I went back and I have over the last couple of weeks, and I've watched like as many, throws that Kyler has made of 20 air yards or more, just to see how much of it is inaccuracy, what gives him problems, what areas of the field give him problems. I'd say, like, you see some of the numbers of he's become poor, really poor from an advanced metric standpoint, throwing the ball vertically. And I'd say it's a combination of a lot of factors. Interior pressure seems to really throw him off. I do think the receiving core played a role. I do think there are times where he can, there's a tendency where he kind of does chunk it up or chuck it up, and it can hang up a little bit, and that does become possible for defenders to snatch it. So a lot of kind of variables with that, but that I think is a conversation. The deep ball is going to be one that we'll talk about a lot throughout the course of the season. So to get Josh's perspective on that was really, really good. This show, I'm going to get into some more subjects. Harrison Smith, someone wanted to know about, and then I'm going to kind of do a positional breakdown of where I kind of think every position group with this team stands, again, because we're like 2 weeks out from camp. So that should be pretty fun. Also, someone wanted to know while I was on the radio what team I think would be the most surprising to miss the playoffs that made it last year, what team I think would be the least surprising to make the playoffs or miss the playoffs from last year. So I'm looking forward to revealing some of my studies from that standpoint. This show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by really good people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. These guys have built a community bank of folks who are connectors within the community, and they are huge Vikings fans. So you got a branch probably, I would imagine, near your community. You walk in, and I promise they will be willing to talk about your favorite team, and they will also make it really easy for you. I needed a couple weeks ago a cashier's check, moving apartments. That's why the background is not our usual setup, and we've got, there's some things in the works from background standpoint. So if you're a YouTube viewer, please stay tuned for that. But I also use First Resource Bank online banking platform all the time. It's so sleek and easy. So cannot recommend First Resource Bank enough if you're looking for another opportunity to set up an account. Really, really good people, and Vikings fans as well. Their information is in the description below. I also want to talk about Pro MN Athletics. So 3 guys a couple years ago, Kurt, Graham, and Tanner, they came together and they're like, how can we provide as much opportunity for kids in this area, middle school age, high school age, et cetera, who want to play quarterback in high school, who want to play receiver in high school, who want to see how far their skills can progress? Like, how can we give them a platform? So they built Pro MN. And they've got a ton of stuff going on. Like, if you check out their social media feeds, it's workout after workout. I mean, I just saw that they are in the mix, or in 2 weeks they're going to have what they're calling a QB Motion Midwest Summer Classic, and it's Minnesota's largest high school 7-on-7, 16 teams, free team and player registration. They've got high school refs involved. And it's first comes, first serve. You play at least 3 games. Like, there are a lot of opportunity. They're playing this at St. Michael Albertville High School from 4 to 9 p.m. on July 30th. So it's just like they've got academies in the winter and the summer. These types of 7-on-7 leagues. They did a faith walk for quarterbacks. They're working with some of the best quarterbacks in the state. So Tanner is Tanner Morgan, who played football for the Gophers, is so sharp thinking about quarterback play and quarterback development. So I just can't say enough about the partnership. It's cool for me when you care about this sport as much as like I've grown to, and these guys want to give back. Really, like, it's cool to be able to partner with them. So check out Pro MN in the description below. All right, first, the Harrison Smith question. So Jeff Marcus on social media tossed this to me while I was hosting the show on KFAN. We talked about this a little bit. Dane Mizutani, the Pioneer Press, and I did on the radio. But Jeff asked, so what is happening with Harrison Smith at safety? What is the timeline for a decision? And what would be the financial implications if he comes back? Will other contracts have to be redone or players released? Or do you think he would retire? So Jeff really hits at everything there. And I'm going to walk through the Harrison Smith conversation as best as we can, because I think it really is an important one. And so here we go. So you guys might be listening to this or watching. You're like, Harrison is 30, he's 37 years old. Yes, he looked really good down the stretch, but what about the duration of what last season was and in the beginning of last season? And so I kind of want to lay it out like this. So Brian Flores' defense, part of what has made it so successful over the last 3 years, and Brian Flores has talked about this, and Harrison Smith has talked about this, so I'm not revealing anything that, would be information privy to the team. But the Vikings defense, so much of what has made it so successful and dominant is because Brian Flores has given players like Harrison Smith license on the field to make decisions on the field. And I would think about it just for you guys as you're trying to conceptualize this. Like, I would think about it exactly like a quarterback making checks at the line of scrimmage. They're surveying players. They understand tendencies. They've studied formations. They've prepared with some of the coaches to understand or visualize what they're getting to then check into the best possible look that gives the defense the most problems. Harrison Smith is the defensive quarterback, has been the defensive quarterback version of that for the Vikings team. So, it doesn't show up in the stat sheet, or it doesn't show up in the highlight reel tackles and pass deflections that Harrison Smith has always made for this team. That stuff probably doesn't surface as much, but what you don't see is really like the recipe for the success that the Brian Flores defense has had. One ingredient to that recipe is Harrison Smith's acumen and his ability to weave in and out of calls, of coverages, of blitzes, of who's doing the blitzing, and then being able to not only identify it, but process the information in split-second decisions and then communicate that via signals to all of the other players on the defense. And that takes to have the bandwidth to recognize things in split seconds after you've just made a tackle or after you've just been gashed, but then also to have the wherewithal within the environment to communicate. Like, you just can't replicate that very much. And so that is why Brian Flores and the Viking staff, head Kevin O'Connell, you can include him in this as well. That is why the Vikings have been very open to allow Harrison Smith to make whatever decision he's going to make on his own time, because they understand that the option of having someone like that command the back end of the defense is not something you can overlook. And if that option is there, then it's, you'd be intelligent probably to hear it out as a possibility. So back to Jeff's, I just want to lay that out because it often gets lost in the Harrison Smith discussion because, we just don't have time for the context and the nuance, but it's a really important layer to it. I'd also say, and we talked about this, like, Harrison's year last year was so wonky because he missed most of training camp with what was a personal health situation, then, which zapped a lot of his offseason training. So then he comes into training camp. He loses a lot of his off-season training. He has to get that back on the fly while also wanting to contribute as much as possible. So he begins the season week 3 against the Bengals. It was nowhere near to him being 100%, but that was his way of starting to work to get back to the strength that he expected to be out of the gate. And then obviously down the stretch, he was critical in many different ways in the success defensively that helped fuel the 5-game stretch that allowed the Vikings to be a hair away from the playoffs, crazy enough. So, Jeff Marcus, what is happening with Harrison at safety? What is the timeline for a decision? What would be the financial implications if he comes back? So what is happening with Harrison at safety? I'd say it's still up in the air. I said this on the radio on Tuesday, but I just do not think you can rule out the possibility that he returns at some point. What is the timeline for a decision? I don't believe there is a very clear-cut timeline. It's more so, how does Harrison's body feel? How does his mind feel? And it feels to me as if the Vikings are giving him essentially a blank canvas for him to color on to allow them to then see, like, if he wants to continue playing, if he doesn't, and like allowing him to make that decision on his own time. As far as what the financial implications would be if he comes back, like, I think it's actually a really interesting point. The Vikings have about $13 million in cap space for 2026. That doesn't mean they have to spend under it, or if they add you can get really creative, and Rob Brzezinski always does with these contracts. But what I do find interesting with that question is just looking at the safety market. So, like, I mean, Cam Bynum's making $15 million in average annual value a year. Amani Hooker, who I can't lie and say I've ever watched the film of, is making $13.5 million a year. Josh Metellus is making $12 million a year. So, like, while Harrison is definitely 37 years old, and while Harrison, I think he would admit physically it's harder than it used to be. I don't know, like, how you could convince me, or really maybe even you guys, like, Grant Delpit's making $12 million. You're going to pay Harrison Smith less than Grant Delpit? I mean, that's kind of an interesting one. Now, the financial implications, Jeff, become less if Harrison Smith doesn't return in camp and the season gets to week 4, week 5, and maybe Harrison's raring to go at that point. And I like, speaking about the timeline, I just am not going to rule that out as a possibility until it becomes very clear cut that it's not. So, and then the last question was, do you think he'd retire? Again, like, I think if Harrison has been very open, and I remember watching film with him for a story, and I'd say if you didn't read that, we watched film of every interception of his career, and it was really, really cool. Or maybe it was his favorite interception from every season in his career. And we talked about, like, just why he still does it and what he loves about it. And this is a guy who's flown planes. He's got a plot of land where he builds stuff down in Knoxville. He was an incredible golfer and should have been in the American Century Championships at Lake Tahoe. I don't know why he wasn't involved in that. That's beyond me. And this is a guy who can do a lot of things. What you can't replicate is being in the fire of games on Sundays. And so I think, if he doesn't hang it up, it will be because replicating that in this life is part of why so many people love playing this game. So that's what I'd say. I will use Harrison to segue a little bit into the position by position breakdown. Before we do that, I wanted to mention Aquarius Home Services. Aquarius is an independent, authorized Connecticut water systems dealer. Get the water you and your family deserve. Have worry-free water flowing through your home just like I do. It's a great time to do it. You can schedule a visit from those guys, a free water test at AquariusHomeservices.com, but right now they're running a trade-in and trade-up program. So you can get additional $500 off when you trade in your old water softener, any make or model, when you trade up to a Connecticut whole home water treatment system. So that's what you're getting here. I mean, it's a game changer. You truly, with Connecticut, you got worry-free water. You don't have to worry about contaminants. You don't have to be working hard to eliminate rusty water, nitrates, lead, or arsenic. Connecticut removes 99% of that, and you can get a Connecticut water system through Aquarius Home Services. Their information is in the description. All right, we're going to run through these positions fairly speedily and just going to give some top line thoughts on all of them. There's also, like, a player that, I just kind of think each room hinges on a little bit, and in some ways or another. So I think it'll be fun to talk through. So, I said this with Dane Mizutani on KFAN 9 noon in filling in. Like, I think the safety room without Harrison Smith is a really interesting one. You've got Josh Metellus, you've got Theo Jackson, you've got Jay Ward, and you've got Jacoby Thomas, and then some of the undrafted guys. The one I'd watch would be Jacob Thomas from James Madison. But like, I've never viewed Josh Metellus, or I don't know if Josh Metellus' best role, best fit is to play in the deep half. Now, that is typically where the hub of communication for Brian Flores defense needs to be. And if Harrison Smith isn't out there, one of the guys capable of being that hub of communication is Josh Metellus, which would mean he would play in the deep half. Now, the question for me is who is playing opposite him? Is it going to be Jay Ward? Would it be Theo Jackson, or would Jacoby Thomas be able to assimilate well enough into this team and this defense to be able to step in and start back there? And so that for me, like, I think so much if Harrison Smith does not return to start the season, I think so much of what that room can be or is going to be contingent on Jacoby Thomas' ability, and Jacoby Thomas really just fit and progression with understanding a system that rarely provides opportunity for rookie players. So, I mean, obviously the Vikings love Jacoby Thomas. Like, I can't say enough how it was very clear entering the draft that the Vikings were okay passing on safety at the top, knowing that if they could acquire a guy like Jacoby Thomas, who is one of their preferred options in the middle, their preferred option clearly in the middle rounds, then they would be more than comfortable and okay with that. And so he'll be one, I'd say, training camp. There are a lot of guys to watch, to follow, to assess. Jacoby Thomas is absolutely one of them. The cornerback room, I'm, surprisingly, shockingly, and this could be an old takes exposed where I get clipped months from now, but like, I'm not as concerned with that room. Yes, you could always have more man cover guys. But Byron Murphy Jr., I wouldn't be surprised if there's kind of a progression to the mean from an interception standpoint. I really thought during training camp, I really thought during OTAs, Byron Murphy Jr. looked really, really good. And that stood out to me. I believe I mentioned that on a podcast, and that was not, that was purposeful. So you've got Byron Murphy Jr., Isaiah Rodgers. We'll see. Can he hold up physically? And just tackling at the point of attack. Those are questions for me, but there were obviously a bunch of flashes. James Pierre was another targeted defender. The Vikings entered free agency knowing they wanted that guy, and were able to get that done. There's continuity there with Brian Flores from Pittsburgh, with Gerald Alexander, the new DBs coach from Pittsburgh, and then Chuck Dimmings. I mean, you could see the athleticism throughout the spring, and he's obviously electric as a personality. So similar to Jacoby Thomas, like, that is one thing about this specific roster coming off this last draft. It's going to be very fun to follow a lot of these rookies because of their backstories, because of what their impact could mean. So, for me, Chuck Dimmings is kind of he's the one of that group that I really think like could turn eyes and be kind of a turning point for that unit. Edge rusher, we've talked a lot about this. It's not a deep enough position. Beyond the quarterback play, beyond the run game, I really think Dallas Turner's production is Caleb Banks' health, obviously, but Dallas Turner's production is going to be a massive component of this 2026 season and how things go, both, as you're evaluating broadly, but also for what this team is capable of and this defense is capable of. So I'd say Dallas Turner is critical. Again, the room is not deep enough. I definitely expect an addition at some point. And then Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is one where, like, I remember even before I showed up for the first spring practice, talking to somebody with the team who was like, make sure to keep your eyes on him. Body looks different. And positionally, it's kind of interesting to see what's up. So he will be one throughout training camp too. Like, if you get him one-on-one against let's say he's running with the twos at edge and you get him one-on-one against Christian Darrisaw or Brian O'Neill, I'll be absolutely locked in and curious to see how that goes. The defensive line, I mean, this is where you are sitting at the blackjack table and and you got 16 and I mean, you see a 9 and you're just hitting. And if it hits, boy, you're going to be high-fiving and fist bumping people across the table because, I mean, look, Caleb Banks, the talent is undeniable. I think this group with the coaching of Ryan Nielsen really has potential, but Caleb Banks' health is huge. Dominique Orange and his consistency is really critical. Jalen Redmond's health, like, you just cannot lose that guy. And then behind them, I mean, I think it's a really interesting group. The wild card for me might be Levi Drake Rodriguez, because I did think in 2025 there were some flashes from Levi Drake. And obviously when you draft Caleb Banks and Dominique Orange, you would just assume the 7th-round pick from Texas A&M Commerce, you're going to slide down the depth chart. But who's to say that more development of a guy who is very committed in Levi Drake Rodriguez can't produce some continued outsized, production? So he'll be one to watch. And then Elijah Williams, I think, is another one for me that I would just be paying attention to as a former UDFA guy. Linebacker, I don't think you can overstate. I said this on Twitter, but Jeremy Fowler of ESPN puts together kind of a position ranking top 10 throughout the NFL. And he did off-ball linebackers on Tuesday. Blake Cashman wasn't in the top 10. He wasn't in the honorable mentions. His name wasn't even voted at all. And I just think that's a total overlooking from the NFL, people within the NFL who I respect dearly, many of them. I think it's a total overlooking of a guy who has been a key cog in one of the best defenses in the league. So I think Blake Cashman's health is just absolutely critical. He missed games last year. The run defense dropped off pretty immediately. And if you told me the defense did not produce the way you expected Brian Flores' Vikings defense to produce in 2026, one of my first guesses for why that would be that Blake Cashman was injured. Offensively, on the O-line, I think we still kind of, we'll talk about quarterback, you talk about run game, but the offensive line in general, I looked this up. So of the NFL teams that played offensive line groups at least 10 snaps, the Vikings played 17 different combinations of O-linemen at least 10 snaps. That was second most in the NFL behind the Los Angeles Chargers. To give a comparison, Seattle had 6 combinations. So there is clearly a correlation to postseason success with offensive line skill set. I mean, it's part of why, one of the interesting turning points or dominoes, Christian Darrisaw not being available throughout the 2024 postseason. How much does that change? I don't really know, but it's an interesting one just looking back. And so whether it's Christian Darrisaw being available and present every single day, whether it's Donovan Jackson staying healthy, he obviously had the wrist last year, whether it's Will Fries, who was really healthy last year, can he continue that upswing? I think that'd be really good. And then the unit, I mean, I've talked to people in Arizona, going back to the beginning of the show. The interior of the offensive line is critical for Kyler Murray. Edge pressure doesn't bother him a ton because he can often evade. It's the interior stuff that affects his vision, that forces a little jitteriness that I think we're all going to have to watch pretty closely throughout training camp and the season. The receiver room, for me, it's just how much 11 personnel are we going to see? I really think 3 of the Vikings' best offensive players are Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Juwan Jennings. So why lean into other personnel groupings if that doesn't allow you to put your best players out there and dictate opposing defenses? I think the guy to watch deep there was Dylan Bell. He just dominated this spring and he's just worth eyeing. Running back, it's all for me about Damon Claiborne and 3 things. Can he be consistent in the way he shows up every day? Can he learn the playbook? And ball security. He had a major problem fumbling at Wake Forest in 2025. If he can carry the ball, if he knows the system, if he proves it every day to coaches, This guy has the potential to be a real serious running back talent. I said it on the radio. Had a lot of people internally tell me if those three things can go right, this guy is one to keep an eye on. And so if you're in like a dynasty league, don't tell anybody you heard it from me, but I would just go scoop that guy. Tight end, big year for TJ Hawkinson, contract year for him. So we'll be very curious. And then the depth at that position is going to be a competition, certainly throughout training camp. That'll be kind of fun to watch. Quarterback, talked about at the top. I'll say just because, like, watching JJ McCarthy and the layering of the football and some of his downfield throws toward the sideline, like those are some areas throughout the 2026 training camp that I will just have my eyes glued towards. Same with accuracy. But like, again, and I've said this before on previous shows, I expect JJ McCarthy to look better. I expect him to look motivated. I expect him to give it his best, a shot as he possibly can, because I just think, like, the guy's 23 years old. He's been through a lot. He's navigated a lot. And, he does want it really bad. So, that's what I'd say about JJ. And then the last one, Eric Hansen asked, give us your playoff teams from last year that would be the most shocking and least shocking not to return to the postseason this upcoming season. I think the least surprising miss, that's kind of a bigger swing for me, would be the Bears. Why do I say that? Well, they forced 33 turnovers that last year. Let's say that number shrinks to, what did the Vikings have last, 21? I mean, that's 12 extra possessions. Let's say it shrinks to the Packers at 14. That's 19 extra possessions that they don't create. And in these games, those are absolutely crucial. The Bears also only had 6 combinations of O-linemen play 10 snaps last year. So let's say they struggle with offensive line health. That would be a reason for regression. And then Drew Dahlman, their center, who was really, really good, who retired, like, he played 100% of the offensive snaps. And how much responsibility did he have pre-snap on that operation? I think it's a very worthwhile question. While I believe I really like Ben Johnson, I really think he's extremely sharp. Not having a clear guy at center, they obviously added Garrett Bradbury. They drafted Logan Jones. But if they were to miss the playoffs, even as high as I am on them, like, I don't think it would surprise me like crazy. I think for the most surprising miss for me would be the Rams. Just, obviously if there's a quarterback injury, then it's a little moot. But Sean McVay as an offensive adapter and leader, Matthew Stafford at quarterback, the versatility offensively with the receiving core and with the tight ends, adding Trent McDuffie and Myles Garrett. I've seen Aaron Donald working out. They just have so many pieces, so much talent. And then defensively, I think Chris Shula, their DC, does a pretty good job. So the Rams would be my pick there. If there's anything we didn't get to on the course of episode 183 of the Alec Lewis Show, toss it in the comments. Throw them at us on social media at Alec_Lewis, at Alec Lewis Show. Support First Resource Bank, Pro Am in Athletics, and their Midwest Summer League. That should be Midwest Summer Classic, Minnesota's largest high school 7-on-7 event. Please support that. Unreal, the clothing brand, repping throughout the show, and then Aquarius Home Services. We appreciate their support. Have a great week. And we will talk to you very, very soon.